Hi, Mike. Thank you for joining me. We're here to have a quick chat about COP today. So you and I, obviously, we're heading over to Dubai later this month, and I have a few questions for you before we go. Can we start with just what is it about COP that we want to be there for, and what are you hoping to bring back in terms of insights for businesses here in New Zealand?
That's a really good question. I mean, as you know, SBC and CLC have been to a number of COPs before, and I'm a little bit unique in the sense that I haven't been there since I've had this role. This is, I think, quite an important COP because it's very business centric, and the UAE have made it very clear that they want to hear the business voice coming through. They think business has a leadership role to play there. There's going to be a lot of businesses attending, and we see that in the amount of interest amongst our membership. And also, this is one where we can really showcase CLC, because CLC is now 5 years old. It's achieved a whole lot of things, and we think it's time that it has its launch at the COP.
You said there's a lot of interest, and yeah, we've heard that MFAT has received more than 100 expressions of interest for those party overflow badges that they're offering. Can you tell me why you think there is so much interest from business ahead of COP this year?
That's a good question. I think possibly it's a few things. I think one, people have felt a bit cooped up in New Zealand after 3 years of not going anywhere, and they're thinking, well, actually, if there was an event that was going to take me overseas, maybe something that's in the region, which is the case with COP, and something that's of such significance, maybe that's one of the reasons there's such an amount of interest. I think interest in COP specifically, but climate generally has, of course, been increasing year on year for the last 5 years. I think the second reason is that it is close. You know, people can get there in a single flight this time. It's not like, you know, you have to go all the way to Egypt or you have to go all the way to the UK. You can get there quite simply, and it's a hub, so it's easy to get to. The flights are reasonably priced and everything else. It's also the location. It's people know that Dubai knows how to put on an event, right? So we know it'll run smoothly. You won't have to worry about food and all those sorts of things that'll be there. They've just recently hosted some massive events there. So we know that as an event hoster and a host, they do it very well. So I think that's another reason. And I do think it's also because this is quite a particular kind of COP. First of all, you know, the report back is going to start, so they're sort of looking at the impact of what these of the targets of Paris, etc. That's significant. And of course, that'll happen next year as well. But this is the first time that will happen, and that's significant. And the second thing I think that's significant, as I mentioned before, is just how many businesses are going. It's becoming a bit of a who's who of business. So if you are a business that's interested in either learning from other businesses, going up and learning about products that might help you with your decarbonisation journey, if you're looking for ideas that can spark your imagination, this is a good one to go to, because you know that the private sector element is going to be massive, and it's going to be a great place to learn from. So I think those are the reasons. From our side of things, this is really about saying we need to take things up a gear in terms of what we're doing as SBC and what we're doing as Climate Leaders Coalition. And so going out and being inspired by others is really critical. Sometimes I think New Zealand can be a little bit inward looking. And so I think looking to the international community for ideas that might spur us on, but equally not being shy about going out and saying, and these are the things that we're doing. Maybe there's some stuff that you could learn from there. So I think that's why there's so much interest.
I think it speaks to the depth and the experience of our businesses here in terms of them feeling more confident going out to that global stage and kind of taking how far we've moved in the last few years into that global platform and starting to speak to others about the journey that we're on too. So yeah, that's what I've been hearing.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I've got a question for you, because, of course, you've been to a couple of COPs before. I've only ever supported people who've been to them. So I know them in theory, but not in practice. I mean, what are your thoughts about this COP in particular, and about COPs in general? Maybe some things you can share with our members about, you know, when you're going to one of these things or intending to, what do you look for?
I think this COP will be new for me as well. I've been in the past as part of a negotiating team, and this will be my first time going as part of a business delegation, so I'll be learning as well. I'm really excited to have the opportunity, I think, to kind of sit in on some of those interesting and emerging discussions about kind of where policy and developments are heading to, and that ever-evolving conversation about what's acceptable in climate action. So that will be really interesting for me. in terms of takeaways from what I've learned from going in the past is eat, drink, and sleep whenever you can. They can be really busy and big events, and kind of working your way around navigating them, and where the good eating points are is really important. That would be my key takeaway for anybody who hasn't been to one before. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Okay, my next question for you, Mike, is you've spoken in the past about how New Zealand's influence in the global climate space is disproportionate to our small size and perhaps our emissions. Can you explain a bit more about what this means and what the opportunity it presents at this year's COP is?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think sometimes we take our position in the world for granted. We forget that we belong to some quite important clubs. We are part of the OECD. That puts us in quite an important position. We are an English-speaking country. That makes us part of a very small club of quite powerful emitters, as well as global influencers. And also, we're sometimes seen, particularly by the West, as a laboratory. We've been a laboratory for all sorts of things, whether that's parliamentary reform, whether that's economic reform, whether that's social reform. We're often seen as a place where, because we're quite small, once we set our mind to something, we can get it done pretty quickly. And so when we do that in spaces like climate, there's quite an interesting story that we can bring. So I thought it was interesting, for example, when I started to look around for examples that were similar to the Climate Leaders Coalition, and I was kind of shocked by how embryonic and quite small these other efforts were. And then I realized, well, it's a little bit easier in New Zealand. We kind of know each other. If we want to stand up a big an organization like this with some major players, it is an effort. And, I don't want to say that it's not an effort, particularly for those who started the process. It's amazing. But it's possible in a way that sometimes it's not so possible in other places. So to be able to sort of hold that up and say, hey, it is possible. It is possible to have a very strong voice as a group of companies that are committed to zero carbon and to getting on that journey fast. And your voice does count. It turns out that when you follow through on what you say you're going to do, and you're very transparent about it, then you've got credibility when it comes to speaking to government, and government does listen. Now, not always, but often. So I think that's part of the story. I think the other reason that I always say this is that it's kind of a pointless exercise for New Zealand to go off on this journey on its own, because we could do a wonderful job in splendid isolation of getting our emissions to zero and still have to cope with all of the devastating effects of climate change because of what everyone else is doing. So it's an and thing here. We have to do this here in New Zealand, so we have the credibility to be able to then go offshore and have a voice. And the voice, I think, is the critical piece here. It's about who your friends are and how you can amplify that voice. So we're lucky with our Australian friends, for example. They've been very inspired by our Climate Leaders Coalition here in New Zealand, and have set up their own Climate Leaders Coalition, which is, imitation is the highest form of flattery. And they've been very generous about that. They've said, look, we just grabbed your idea and we're running with it. That's brilliant. We've taken a thing that applied to 5 million people, and now it applies to 27 million people. That's brilliant in and of itself. That we can then apply that even more broadly into some of our other trading partners. And if you think about who those trading partners are, whether it's the EU or the UK or the US or Canada or Australia, or it's India or China or Southeast Asia, they're all big emitters in and of themselves. So again, that influence piece becomes really important. So just as we've been influential on the international trade stage in terms of what we've been able to achieve with the WTO and other rules, so too can we be influential here. But we've got to have credibility. We've got to be able to show that actually we walk the talk, just as we do with trade.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, last question from me. You'll be heading up a little early, I think, to participate in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD meeting. That's taking place a couple of days before COP kicks off. Are you able to just give our members a bit of insight into what that is and what you're hoping to get from it? Sure.
So this is the council meeting. So this is the CEOs who are members of the WBCSD and they basically represent about 150 very large companies. Many of them are name brands that you'll know of, some of whom are members of ours as well here in New Zealand. And what's great about that is it gives you an opportunity to actually see them speak, to be able to speak to those CEOs and try to take the pulse of where things are internationally on climate and more broadly on sustainability. We're very fortunate. We're given quite a lot of space to speak, even though we are not ourselves members of WBCSD, so that's great. This one will be very focused on the COP. They've intentionally aligned it with the timing of COP, and it's located in Dubai. The last time they did this was back in Paris. So this is quite unusual and very, very useful. So this will be about getting our ducks in a row going into the COP. You would have seen there's been some quite ambitious statements come out of WBCSD in the last 2 or 3 weeks in this area. So it's quite helpful for us to work along with them. And I suppose I just want to give a shout out to Lorette Simonik, who's gone from being working for us here in New Zealand, and she's now working for WBCSD out of London. And so that's fantastic, because it means we've got a champion within WBCSD who understands where we're coming from, understands how the COP works, and so is a great intermediary there. So there's a lot that we can achieve, I think, in those 3 days leading into it, and we've been doing some preparation. I mean, the thing that I hope to get out of this is some bold statements from the global business community to really keep that momentum going, even as the world faces so many other challenges.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike, for your time today and for explaining to us what we're hoping to achieve out of going to COP, and also what we hope to offer our members from us going along. Just a quick reminder to everybody that there's a webinar coming up on the 8th of November if you're interested, just to give a little bit more information about the logistics and a few more details about what will be going on while we're there. That's it from us. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonia.